Okay, we've talked about combining two independent clauses, and so now we need to talk about the other kind of clause, which is a dependent clause. So while an independent clause can stand on its own, a dependent clause cannot. It cannot stand on its own as a complete sentence. And usually the reason for this is what we call a subordinating conjunction. So if you look at these sentences then, we've got a couple of words here that take what would be a complete sentence. I go to the store. That would be fine by itself. But when I add on when, this makes it less than a complete sentence. It's a subordinating conjunction. And the word subordinating there, it means to make it less than. It makes it subordered, less ordered. If you want to eat the cake, if makes it less than a complete sentence. Because I took flying lessons, because makes that less than a complete sentence. So in terms of the use of commas, the use of punctuation with dependent clauses then, the first thing is we need to just, figure out what kind of clauses we have. So we need to identify whether we have independent and dependent clauses or just a couple of independent clauses, one independent clause, whatever the pattern is, we need to kind of figure out that pattern. And so I want to get you, I want you to be familiar, to start becoming familiar with that pattern sheet that's listed in the in this lesson. In that pattern sheet, you'll see that there are several main patterns for combining independent and dependent clauses. And so then these are the patterns for combining dependent clauses with independent clauses. And so this first one, if the dependent clause comes first, and notice that that is itself a dependent clause. So if the dependent clause comes first, that's dependent. A comma is needed between the independent and dependent clauses. So you'll see that there's a comma right there, and this is the second part then is the independent clause. And then this next sentence says no comma is required. That is an independent clause if the dependent clause comes after the independent clause. So this is a dependent clause. Okay, so again, and the word that makes each of these clauses dependent in each of these cases is this word if. If you stick the word if onto any sentence, it suddenly becomes less than a complete sentence. A couple more examples here. Dependent clause first, because Sam was hungry, comma, he went to the diner. But if I flip that sentence around, I have exactly the same sentence, but I put the independent clause first. Sam went to the diner because he was hungry. Notice that there is no comma. So there's a comma if the dependent clause comes first, no comma if the dependent clause comes second. And just one kind of additional note. You see this word because here, and I think a lot of us have been taught at some point never use the word because to begin a sentence. And the reason why we were taught that is that if we start a sentence with the word because, it's possible that we will not finish it. And so if you were taught that by a teacher at some point, it was probably good advice for you not to do that, but it was probably not really meant to be a hard and fast rule. And typically the places where we run into problems with this is when we're in a class, for example, let's say like a history class, and we're asked a question like, why did the Civil War begin? Okay. Perfectly fine kind of question. Our answer might be something like, because the South wanted to continue slavery. And that would probably be a perfectly fine kind of answer, but it's not a complete sentence. If I just say, because the South wanted to continue slavery, it's probably a correct answer to the question, why did the Civil War begin? But it's not a complete sentence, so I'd have to finish it. So if I start with because, I need to finish my sentence. So because the South wanted to continue slavery, it seceded from the North. And now we have a complete sentence. And that feels kind of stilted. I mean, if you're talking to somebody and you ask them a question and they make this long kind of answer, so if you say, why did you go to your friend's house? And they say back to you, because my friend was lonely, that's probably the correct response. If they say, because my friend was lonely, I went to my friend's house, and just in order to give you a complete sentence, it might feel kind of awkward. All right, well, that's all I have for independent and dependent clauses. And again, I want to encourage you to take a look at the punctuation pattern sheet that's being included as a handout on this lesson, and to really have that next to you as you're completing the exercises.